Hello, I'm Bruce Zimmerman, and this is the Open Line Garden Show podcast for this week. How often have I walked with my wife down the street or gone in the car, gone into an area where we haven't walked before or we haven't gone and visited? And of course, my wife knows that if we're going to do this, that I have to be the passenger, not the driver, because I'm always looking at the landscapes, the plant material, etc. I've been like this all my life, so therefore she has come accustomed to doing the driving for that purpose. She knows me too well. Here's a couple of questions, and these are from observations that I have seen. More and more I am seeing two kinds of landscaping. One, the absolute minimal landscape, and the other, a higher end landscape that basically has been designed, maintained by a company, and if they want to add and spend the money for color, they drop in $1.5 million annuals in that whole garden. Now, the properly designed one is fairly interesting, but what I'm finding is you always find the front yard landscaping almost always the same. It's boring. It's the same thing. It's all like they were in the same design class in school. So as I go along and I go on different garden tours and I go down different streets and we look at landscape, etc., I'm seeing the same things no matter where I go. Now, here's what you don't want to do. And probably the best measure of whether this works or not is, does your landscape stand out from all the rest of those on the street? I'm not saying every street in your area, but your street. First, 1, do people notice your front yard landscaping when they're walking by, driving by? Do they notice? If they don't, then you haven't done a good job, or you don't care. If you think dropping a ton of annuals in the front yard will give you color and interest, not a hope. So what you want to do is when you're looking at a landscape, particularly from the front yard, 1, you're going to look at it from basically lot line to lot line, and you're going to walk along. And you are going to see and observe the vistas from each angle as you walk along, whether it's on the sidewalk in front of your house or across the street. Personally, I prefer to do both. And the reason for that is that a lot of people will walk on one side or the other. On our street, basically, there is only one sidewalk, and it's the other side of the street, and people continually walk their dogs. It's like a parade of different breeds of different dogs like I've never seen in my entire life. So, what you want to do is, do they notice your landscape? Does it stand out? First of all, what you want to do is you're going to look at 1, texture, color, shape, and permanency. In other words, the bones of the garden. The bones of the garden are those that don't really change. And particularly in a front yard, they're usually the evergreens. Now, it doesn't mean they have to all be evergreens. You can have shrubs. You can have things that change. But you really need to have different shapes, textures, and colors. So, if you have a golden globe cedars, or you have pyramidal spruce, particularly green, okay, because the last thing you want in the front yard is pyramidal blue spruce or green spruce, which take up most of the front yard landscape. And if they get the usual diseases, etc., or stress, they lose the bottom leaves and they look as ugly can be. So, backyard in the corners is where those go, okay? Not the front yard. You don't want to block out your yard. You want people to notice and to admire and appreciate it. Does it wrap around and smooth the lines? Yes, it should. It should predominantly be evergreen so that it's good year-round. And then texture, okay? A holly. A holly has a different texture than a big leaf rhododendron, which has a different texture to the cedars, which has a different texture to the junipers. The junipers can be blue, they could be gold, they could be green, but you want to do the shapes. And you don't want to generally achieve the shape by constantly pruning them to that shape. It looks very boxy, very, how shall I say, ugly, okay? Plants don't grow in geometric shapes. And as one of my teachers once said, it looks like an accountant lives there. That's what you're not trying to achieve. You want the plants to be kept their natural shape and texture and color, and at the same time you want to be able to control their size. This takes a little bit of care, maintenance, and time in pruning, as well as you don't want them to all be round, right? You don't want them all covering the ground like a ground cover. You want shape, texture, color. So once you have achieved this, you have to stop and think about color. Is this landscape colorful enough that people notice? Maybe. Is it receptive? In other words, do people coming to your house feel welcome? Do they enjoy coming to your house? Do they enjoy walking by and admiring and looking at your house? If they don't, then the landscape isn't working for you. It's not augmenting the beauty of your house. Don't cover it up. It's your most valuable asset other than your family. Got it? So, you want to go and design it so that it has all those features. But there's also a progression, a change. If you look at the same thing day in, day out, forever and ever, it's boring even for you to come home. You will find that you will absolutely ignore your landscape because nothing changes. Nothing comes up. Nothing interests you. So, start in the spring. Think of spring bulbs. Think of species crocus, or snowdrops. Now, those both have to be planted in mass in order to give great color or effect. But you could go and put in species tulips as well. But the species crocus come up so early that they sort of herald spring. They come up before early daffodils, and in some cases even earlier than the magnolias, the star magnolias. So there's another example where a flowering shrub, which can give you a nice round, fairly small sized tree or shrub, depending on how well you can maintain size and shape and how good you are at pruning, will still give you color and have change between early spring, 2 weeks later, with more and in white. But the white will be effective because of the amount of bloom and the size of bloom and the height of bloom. The daffodils are all down below. Daffodils are generally yellow, right? Put in purple crocus. Change, timing, color, progression. This helps. If you've got blue star junipers, looks fabulous with daffodils coming up behind them. So in the spring, you've got the blues and the yellows. First thing, do it. You always plant them a little further back so that you can drop annuals in at the beginning and at the front of them. So as the foliage is dying down of your spring bulbs, you don't have to take them off. They're not going to get covered up. They can make food for flowers, for strength, and multiply for next year. So the annuals go in. The annuals should be considered, they shouldn't hurt your eyes. In other words, please use subtle changes of color as opposed to two glaring colors that don't go well together. They clash. They want to also be colors that augment the colors of the house. Now you can change the colors of the house if you need to in order to meet the annuals. And this used to be done back in the 80s, etc., where Benjamin Moore Paints would go in and say, okay, here's the plant, here's the flower, I want you to mix the paint, and we're going to paint our front door or our awnings or our, any part of the house that is going to match the annuals. And they could do that, and they did that, and it's very, very effective, and it stands out. You may not want to do that because you can't always get the exact same annuals, but in most cases, you can get something very, very close. You can also change the color of those particular parts of your house if you wish, and change it every 5-10 years, whatever you like. But you want to keep changing your house and your style. You want it to look as if something's happening in your garden, so that when people pull into your driveway, they are, well, let's put it this way. They are, I won't say stunned, but they appreciate it. They will look at your garden, and they will know where the front door is without it being covered up. So remember that those little island gardens that used to be great just out by the street, they foreshorten a yard and stop your eye, so get rid of those. You want to take the edges of your lot line and don't put in a hedge unless it's absolutely necessary, or that hedge has a feature that's going to be fantastic for you for the whole season. Do I like to put roses in a front yard? No, they belong in a backyard. But these other plants, annuals, etc., can be done. Can they bloom at different times? Yes, particularly when you're doing the lot lines between the road and there. And make sure that as you're backing out, no matter what you do with your garden, that you can see the traffic and the traffic can see you. Very, very important. So do all of these things and you will find you'll have an interesting front landscape. Anything less than these different aspects of a front yard and you're boring, you're certainly not contributing to the value of your home or the resale value of your home. You're not welcoming your guests or yourselves as you walk home. You will ignore it because it doesn't do anything for you. Do that. And then sooner or later, people will start noticing your yard as they drive by, walk by, whether they're walking the dogs or the kids. You can. Now, I will say that I've always wanted a Loch Ness Monster going across my front lawn. I like and love topiaries. But topiaries basically have a spot. You can't do a whole topiary garden and shape the whole thing. It looks very, very contrived. But through this whole landscape, I did put a Loch Ness Monster going across the front lawn. Of course, the Loch Ness Monster has a Santa hat on for the winter and a gardening hat for the summer and gardening season. People notice. They notice the change. And little kids, when they're taking a walk with their parents, they'll go and stop and look at the dragon. And sometimes they even ask if they can come and have their picture taken with the dragon. And I always say yes. And they're always appreciative, okay? Because it's cool. It's neat. It's different. My kids like it. They like it. So maybe yours would too. A suggestion doesn't mean that it's something you're going to do. Maybe it'll be a giraffe. Maybe it'll be topiary teddy bears and it's a teddy bear's picnic or other things like that. Or do also what I have done, and that is do an inuksuk with stone, okay? Now, a real inuksuk, not one of those ones that's pre-drilled, pre-made, and, of course, glued together very often. This actually has to freestand itself. Or the primitive bird that I have, which I call a pukeko, which is a very primitive bird from New Zealand. It sits over on the other side, and you'll swear that its eye follows you as you walk down the street, and it's keeping an eye on you. Okay? So, be different, be adventurous, but do follow some of the rules that will make your garden yours and, of course, interesting and noticeable and welcoming. I'm Bruce Zimmerman. This is the Open Line Garden Show podcast for this week.